Can you imagine waking up one morning, walking out to your porch, and finding out that someone claimed your land was theirs to use, not just for a picnic, but for a gathering of 150 realtors? No permission, no contract, just bold lies and a clipboard. The HOA Karen swore my ranch was reserved, and by the time I found out, cars were lining up, people stepping out in suits, cameras flashing. And then, she demanded I open the gate. But I didn't. Instead, I made one decision that changed the entire day, forever. Welcome, folks, to HOA Max Stories, where we share real tales of homeowners standing their ground. My name's Tom. I live out here on a quiet ranch in the heart of Texas, raising cattle and minding my own business, until the HOA decided to make me their target. Now, before I tell you how this whole madness played out, I'd like to ask you something. If you're enjoying stories like these, hit that subscribe button, it helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know if you're tuning in from Texas like me, or maybe from across the country. I leaned against that wooden fence. The morning sun was rising high over the ranch. And all I could hear was the sound of gravel crunching under the tires of cars pulling up one by one. At first, I thought it must have been a mistake. Maybe someone typed the wrong address into their GPS. Maybe some realtors got lost on their way to a convention in town. But no. The more I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't an accident. This was organized. And right in the middle of it, standing tall in her bright red suit, was Karen. Now, I don't know if you've ever dealt with a real HOA Karen before. But believe me when I say, they don't walk up to you asking. They walk up telling. She strutted right up to my gate like she owned the place, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. And without even saying hello, she started barking orders. Open this gate. The realtors will be here any minute. We've reserved your property for the afternoon. I just stared at her for a second, trying to process the nonsense I had just heard. Reserved my property? My ranch? I shook my head slowly. Ma'am, you must be out of your mind. But she wasn't joking. Behind her, more and more cars kept pulling up, men and women in suits stepping out, looking around like they were about to tour some new luxury estate. They looked confused, though. And I could tell right away. Karen had told them a story. She waved her papers in the air, like some kind of badge of authority. These are confirmations, she shouted. We've planned this event for weeks. The realtors are expecting a full presentation out here on this land. I couldn't believe my ears. Weeks? A presentation? And no one bothered to ask the actual landowner? I leaned closer on the gate, my boots pressing into the dirt. And I said, Lady, this land isn't yours to rent out. You don't have the right. You don't have the power. And you sure don't have my permission. Her face twisted with anger. She jabbed her finger toward me like a rattlesnake striking. You will open this gate right now, or I'll have the HOA fine you for obstructing community events. I almost laughed. Community events? This was my private ranch, not some picnic table at the neighborhood park. And yet, Karen acted like the queen of the HOA, demanding her way, convinced that her word was law. The realtors behind her started whispering. Some pulled out their phones. I could see the uncertainty growing. But Karen didn't stop. She walked right up to the wooden gate, pressed her hand against it, and leaned in close. You are making a mistake, all these people are waiting, you're embarrassing yourself. Now, I'm a patient man. I don't go looking for fights. But when someone threatens my home, my land, my peace, I don't back down either. So I looked her straight in the eye, and told her, this gate stays closed. Her voice went up an octave. You don't understand. I promised them this land. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't just being bossy. She had actually told these 150 realtors that she had secured my ranch as if it were hers to give. She lied to them, and now, she was stuck. But instead of admitting it, she doubled down. She pulled out her phone, started calling someone, pacing back and forth like a general preparing for war. And me? I just stood there, leaning on my fence, calm on the outside, but boiling on the inside. The ranch was my father's before it was mine. It had been in the family for generations. Blood, sweat, and years of hard work kept this land alive. And this woman thought she could waltz in and hand it over for an afternoon realtor party? Not on my watch. The more cars arrived, the crazier it looked. A line of shiny SUVs, trucks, and sedans stretched down the dirt road. Men and women in sharp suits stood outside the fence, holding folders, sipping bottled water, looking at me like I was ruining their day. But none of them were invited. And none of them had the right to be there. I tightened my grip on the top rail of the gate and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This ranch is closed. Nobody's coming in today." Karen turned around, her face red with fury. She waved her arms at the crowd, shouting about how uncooperative I was. How unfair. How selfish. But I could see it in their eyes. The realtors weren't angry with me. They were angry with her. Because they realized they had been tricked. Still, Karen didn't let go. She stormed back up to the fence, stabbing her finger at me. "If you don't open this gate, you'll regret it. The HOA will not let this slide." I crossed my arms, smiled just a little, and said, "Ma'am, I think you're the one who's gonna regret it." And in that moment, I made up my mind. If she wanted to play games, if she wanted to push me to the edge, then I'd push back harder. Because I had one move left that she didn't expect. And that's the moment I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. And now, let me ask you all something. If you were standing at that gate and 150 strangers showed up on your land because Karen said she reserved it, what would you do first? Would you argue with her face to face, or would you call the cops right away? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear how you would handle a Karen like this. I had my phone in my hand now, and the second Karen saw it, her eyes narrowed. She knew exactly what I was about to do. She started shouting louder, trying to cover her tracks, yelling at the crowd of realtors that everything was fine, that I was just being difficult. But her voice shook. For the first time, I could tell she was nervous. I dialed the sheriff's office, my thumb pressing down slow and deliberate. And in those few seconds, the entire ranch went quiet. All those people in their polished shoes and pressed suits, they froze. Like they were waiting to see which side of this fence would win. When the dispatcher answered, I kept my voice calm. "Yeah, this is Tom McAllister out on County Road 17. I've got trespassers at my ranch. Someone brought over 100 people here without permission. They're refusing to leave. I need an officer." I could feel Karen's eyes burning holes into me as I spoke. She tried to shout over me, waving those useless papers in the air. "This is our event. He's lying. He's obstructing." But nobody believed her. Not even her own guests. When I hung up, I leaned against the fence again, just as calm as before. And I said, "The law is on its way. You might want to start telling the truth now." Karen's face turned beet red. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. But she wasn't done. No, a true HOA Karen never admits defeat. She doubles down. She spun around and started barking at the crowd. "Don't listen to him. He's just being dramatic. The HOA has every right to use this property. He's required to cooperate. He signed the covenants when he moved here. The problem was, I never signed anything like that. This ranch had been in my family since before that HOA even existed. And everyone knew it." The crowd of realtors started to shift uneasily. Some were muttering about refunds, others were taking videos on their phones. One man actually walked up to Karen and asked, "Did you even get permission for this?" Karen snapped back at him, "Of course I did. It's all arranged." But the way her voice cracked, you could tell she was losing control. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to yell. The more silent I stayed, the more her lies unraveled on their own. But then, she made a move that made my blood boil. She grabbed the latch on my gate and tried to force it open. The wood rattled hard, the chain clanged against the metal post. But the lock held strong. I stepped forward fast, putting my hand on the gate. "Touch that lock again," I said, my voice low, steady. "And I'll have you charged before the cops even get here." For a second, silence. Nobody moved. You could hear the wind through the grass, the creak of a car door closing far down the line. And then Karen pulled her hand back, but not because she wanted to. Because she saw the crowd was watching her, and not one of them was on her side anymore. By now, I could see dust rising on the road in the distance. The sheriff's SUV was coming fast, lights already flashing. Karen tried to save face. She turned back to the realtors and shouted, "Don't worry, I'll handle this. This man will be forced to cooperate." But her voice had lost all its fire. It sounded desperate now, like someone clinging to power that wasn't really there. The sheriff's vehicle pulled up just outside the gate. 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the scene. One of them walked over to me first. "Morning, Tom. What's going on here?" I told him plain and simple. "This woman brought a crowd of over 100 people here, claiming she reserved my ranch. She has no permission. No contract. Nothing. She's trespassing, and she's refusing to leave." The deputy nodded slowly. Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, is that true? Did you organize an event here without the owner's permission?" Karen's hands shook as she waved her clipboard again. "These are my documents. The HOA bylaws give us rights to." But the deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, this is private property. Bylaws don't override ownership. If he didn't give you written permission, you don't have the right to be here." The crowd of realtors erupted in murmurs. Some shook their heads, others pulled out their phones to record. Karen's face went pale. She tried to argue, tripping over her words, but the deputies weren't buying it. "Ma'am," one of them said firmly, "you need to leave this property immediately. And you need to take everyone you brought with you. If you don't, we'll have to remove you." For the first time all day, Karen went quiet. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. The realtors didn't wait. One by one, they started walking back to their cars. Engines revved, doors slammed, and slowly, the long line of vehicles started to shrink. Karen stayed frozen in place, fuming, humiliated. Finally, she spun on her heel, stormed toward her car, and peeled off down the road. The deputies stayed a while longer, making sure everyone cleared out. When the dust settled, and the last car disappeared over the hill, I was left standing by my gate again, in silence. I looked out at the empty road, the calm fields beyond, and for the first time all morning, I smiled. Because my land was mine again. Safe. Protected. And I thought to myself, you can fight me, you can lie about me, you can even try to take what's mine. But you'll never win if you don't have the truth. That day proved it. Now let me ask you folks something. If you were in my boots, would you have let Karen embarrass herself until the cops showed up? Or would you have confronted her harder, right from the start? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear how you would have handled that showdown at the gate. The deputies had barely pulled away when I leaned back against the fence, the sun high above me now, beating down hard on the dusty road. The air was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful just yet. Because deep inside, I knew something. Karen wasn't done. A woman like her, the kind who thrives on control, who can't stand losing face in front of a crowd, she wasn't going to just pack up and go home. No, she'd be back. And she'd come back louder, meaner, and with more tricks up her sleeve. I walked back toward the porch, wiping the sweat from my brow. The ranch dogs were pacing near the gate, still restless from all the commotion. They could feel it too, the storm wasn't over. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down for a moment, looking out over the land. This place wasn't just dirt and grass to me. It was memory. It was family. It was years of sacrifice. And I'll be damned if someone like Karen thought she could turn it into her personal playground. But as I sat there, replaying her words in my head, something gnawed at me. She had said it with such certainty. That she had the right. That the HOA could claim the land for a community event. It didn't make sense. This ranch wasn't in their jurisdiction. I had never signed a covenant. So where did she get the nerve to say it like it was fact? I decided to find out. I grabbed the folder where I kept every single land document, every deed, every legal paper tied to this ranch. I flipped through them, page by page. And sure enough, not a single line connected me to the HOA. Which meant Karen had lied. Not just to me. Not just to the Realtors. But possibly to the entire association. That realization lit a fire in me. Because now, it wasn't just about my gate. It was about exposing her. Hours later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, my phone buzzed. A neighbor down the road called me up. "Tom, did you hear? Karen's calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight." I clenched my jaw. There it was. She wasn't letting go, she was doubling down. I told him, "I'll be there." When evening rolled around, I drove into town, the smell of dust still lingering in the air from the day's chaos. The HOA meeting hall was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Every seat filled, people standing in the back, murmurs echoing through the room. Everyone wanted to know what happened at my ranch. Karen was already at the front, standing behind a folding table, shuffling papers like a nervous politician. But the moment she saw me walk in, her face stiffened. The whispers grew louder. People turned their heads, following me with their eyes as I made my way to the back of the room. Karen slammed her papers down and started speaking. "Neighbors, today we faced an unfortunate misunderstanding. Certain individuals are refusing to cooperate with community guidelines. This behavior is harmful, and frankly, unacceptable." Her words hung in the air, heavy, accusatory, directed squarely at me. I stayed silent, arms crossed. I wanted to hear every lie come out of her mouth before I made my move. She went on about how the HOA had every right to use my ranch, how I had signed agreements years ago, how I was acting against the community spirit. And the more she talked, the more restless the crowd became. People began whispering, shaking their heads. Finally, one man in the front raised his hand. "Karen, did you really tell 150 realtors they could hold an event on Tom's land?" Her voice faltered. She shuffled her papers again. "Well, arrangements were made, certain permissions were implied. But that was my moment." I stepped forward, my boots echoing on the tile floor. And I held up my folder of documents. "Implied?" I said, my voice low but clear. "These are the deeds to my land. Every page signed by my family for generations. Not one line connects this ranch to your HOA. Not one. You lied to those realtors, and you lied to everyone in this room." The hall went silent. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Karen's face went white as chalk. I laid the folder down on the table in front of her. "Show me, Karen. Show me where it says you own my land. Show me the covenant. Show me the agreement. Right here, right now." Her hands trembled. She fumbled with her stack of papers, flipping pages back and forth, but there was nothing. Nothing but empty words. Murmurs turned into angry voices. Neighbors were demanding answers. Some called her a fraud, others said they wanted her off the board immediately. Karen tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She stammered, insisting it was a miscommunication. But nobody bought it anymore. Her power was slipping right through her fingers, and she knew it. I looked around that room, at the faces of people who had lived under her thumb for years. And I said, "This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. How many more times has she abused her position? How many more times has she claimed rights she doesn't have? The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others clapped. Karen tried to shout over them, but it was too late. The tide had turned. And as I stood there, watching her crumble under the weight of her own lies, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Relief. Because it wasn't just me against her anymore. It was the whole community. Now let me ask you something. If you caught someone lying to an entire crowd just to cover their own ego, would you call them out publicly like I did, or would you handle it quietly behind closed doors? Tell me down in the comments. I'm curious how you deal with a liar like Karen. The meeting ended in chaos, voices echoing through the hall, neighbors pointing fingers, some slamming their hands on the tables. Karen tried to slip away quietly, clutching her papers to her chest, but everyone saw it. She was cornered, exposed. I walked out into the cool night air, the cicadas buzzing in the distance, the weight of the day finally settling on my shoulders. But even as I got into my truck and started the engine, I knew one thing for certain. Karen wasn't finished with me yet. A woman like her doesn't just lose power and walk away. She plots. She schemes. She digs deeper until she finds another way to strike back. I drove home slow, headlights cutting through the dark country road, dust trailing behind me. When I pulled up to the ranch, the dogs barked from the porch, tails stiff, ears up. They could smell something I couldn't. And sure enough, when I reached the gate, I noticed it. The chain was loose. The padlock was hanging half open. Somebody had tried to tamper with it. I felt my stomach tighten. It was still locked, but scratched, scuffed. And I knew right away who would dare touch it. I scanned the dirt road for tracks, crouching down with my flashlight. Tire marks, fresh ones, swirled in the gravel. Whoever it was hadn't just driven by, they had stopped. Watched. Maybe even tried to come inside. I stood there for a long moment, the beam of my light cutting across the gate, the silence of the night pressing in heavy. And I thought to myself, she's testing me. She's daring me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the wood, every rustle in the grass outside the window made me sit up straight. The ranch felt different now, like someone had invaded not just my land, but my peace. The next morning, I headed into town for supplies. When I pulled into the hardware store parking lot, I caught sight of two neighbors standing by the entrance, deep in conversation. As soon as they saw me, they walked over. Tom, one of them said, "You better keep your eyes open. Karen's been telling folks she's not done with you yet. She's saying you embarrassed her on purpose, and she wants payback." I sighed, gripping the steering wheel tight. That woman wasn't just dangerous because of her lies, she was dangerous because she couldn't stand losing control. And now, she was out for revenge. I bought a new heavy-duty lock, steel chain, and even a pair of motion sensor lights. If she wanted to play games, I was going to be ready. When I got back home, I set to work right away. The sun beat down on my back as I pulled the old lock off, replaced it with the new one, and ran the chain tighter than before. I climbed a ladder and installed the motion lights on the posts by the gate. Any car that tried to pull up in the night would light up like daylight. And as I tightened the final bolt, I said out loud to myself, "Let her try now." Days passed. The ranch grew quiet again, but the quiet felt like the kind that comes before a storm. I worked the cattle, fixed a section of fence out by the creek, rode the horses along the ridge. On the surface, everything seemed normal. But in the back of my mind, I could still hear her voice echoing. "You'll regret this." It wasn't until Friday evening when the storm finally broke. I was cooking supper in the kitchen when I saw the glow of headlights sweeping across the yard. Not just one, not two, but 3 vehicles pulling up fast. I stepped out onto the porch, wiping my hands on a rag, and sure enough, there she was. Karen. Her car in the lead, 2 SUVs trailing behind her. She climbed out, dressed sharp again, this time with 2 men at her side. Not neighbors. Not family. Strangers in suits. She walked right up to the gate, the motion light snapping on bright, flooding her in white. And with a smug smile, she raised a stack of papers above her head. This time, Tom. I came prepared. I tightened my jaw, stepping down off the porch, boots crunching on the gravel as I walked toward her. She handed one of the papers to the men beside her. They flipped it open, cleared their throats, and started reading. It was some kind of legal notice. A demand. Claiming that under community development rights, the HOA could enter and use the land for public functions. It looked official, stamped, signed. But I knew better. I'd seen enough of these tricks to spot one when it came waving in my face. I held out my hand, and the man gave me the paper. I scanned it under the floodlight, line by line. And just as I thought, it was nonsense. A fabricated document, full of big words that meant nothing in court. I looked Karen dead in the eye, and tore it right down the middle. Her jaw dropped. The men beside her shifted uncomfortably. The dogs barked from the porch, their hackles raised. This land, I said slowly, letting the shredded pieces fall to the dirt, belongs to me. And if you set 1 foot past this gate, I'll make sure you regret it worse than today. Karen's smile finally cracked. Her eyes flashed with rage, her hands trembling at her sides. But she didn't move forward. She didn't dare. After a long, tense silence, she hissed, "This isn't over." She spun around, stormed back to her car, and the 3 vehicles peeled off into the night. The dust rose behind them, catching in the floodlight beam, drifting across the ranch road like smoke after a fire. I stood there long after they were gone, hands on the gate, my chest heavy. I knew she'd be back. I knew she wasn't finished. But in that moment, I wasn't afraid. Because every trick she threw at me only made her weaker, and me stronger. And I thought to myself, maybe the real question wasn't if she'd come back, but how far she was willing to go, before she finally broke. Now let me ask you folks something. If someone showed up at your gate with fake documents, trying to scare you with fancy words and threats, would you stand tall and tear them up like I did, or would you call a lawyer right then and there? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to hear how you'd handle it. The night after she showed up with those fake papers, I barely slept. Every time the wind rattled the windows, every time the dogs barked at a shadow, I sat up in bed, half expecting headlights to flash across the yard again. But the night stayed quiet, too quiet. By morning, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally given up. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of person to back down after being humiliated twice. No, people like her don't stop when they're wrong. They fight harder, no matter how foolish it makes them look. And sure enough, the storm rolled in again, only this time, it wasn't quiet. It started with phone calls. Neighbors ringing me up, one after another. "Tom, did you hear what Karen's saying about you? She told the HOA board you attacked her at the gate. She's spreading around that you threatened her life." I nearly dropped the receiver. Threatened her life? That was the story she was peddling now? I rubbed my temples, pacing the kitchen floor. This wasn't just lies, this was slander. And worse, she was planting seeds with the board. I knew how rumors worked. Repeat them enough, and folks start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're true. By noon, things escalated. I looked out from my porch and saw 2 county cruisers rolling up the dirt road, kicking up dust as they came. My heart sank, though I knew I had nothing to hide. The deputies pulled up, lights flashing but sirens off. One stepped out and adjusted his hat. "Afternoon, Tom. Mind if we have a word?" I waved them in. They asked me about Karen's claims, how she told them I yelled at her, how I supposedly threatened her safety, how she was terrified to even walk past my property now. The more they talked, the more my blood boiled. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't even step past the gate. Every word out of her mouth was twisted fiction. I looked both deputies square in the eye and said, "Gentlemen, she's lying through her teeth. I never threatened her. Not once. If anything, I've been the one under attack. You saw it yourself the other day, she brought an army of strangers to my ranch without permission. And now she's playing the victim?" The deputies exchanged glances. They knew me. They knew my father before me. And they knew Karen's reputation in town. One of them scribbled something in his notebook and said, "Don't worry, Tom. We're not here to arrest you. We're just doing our job. But keep your head cool. She's stirring up a hornet's nest." As they pulled away, I felt both relief and anger. Relief that they didn't buy her lies. Anger that she was stooping this low, dragging the law into it, trying to smear my name like mud across the county. But that wasn't the end. Later that same week, I drove into town for supplies, and folks were looking at me differently. Some nodded in support, patting my back, telling me to hang in there. But others gave me long stares, whispers behind my back, suspicion in their eyes. Karen's poison was spreading. At the feed store, I overheard two men talking near the counter. "Did you hear Tom threaten that HOA lady? They say he nearly pulled a gun on her." I slammed my bag of seed down louder than I meant to, and they jumped. When they saw me, their faces went red. They mumbled excuses and shuffled out. That's when it hit me hard. This wasn't just about my ranch anymore. This was about my name. My reputation. Everything my family had built here for decades. And if Karen thought she could tear that down with lies, she was dead wrong. So I started gathering my own evidence. I printed copies of my land deeds. I dug up the sheriff's incident report from the day she brought the Realtors. I even collected statements from neighbors who had been at the meeting when I exposed her. If Karen wanted a war of words, then I'd fight with truth. But before I could even put my case together, she struck again, this time, louder than ever. That weekend, a local reporter showed up at my gate. She had a cameraman with her, a microphone in hand, and Karen standing smugly by her side. The reporter called out, "Mr. McAllister, do you want to comment on the allegations? Karen says you locked her and dozens of realtors out of land she reserved. She claims you threatened her safety." I froze. There it was. She dragged the media into it. Neighbors started to gather near the road, curious about the cameras. I could feel every eye on me. This wasn't just a fight at the fence anymore, this was a spectacle. I stepped forward, calm but firm, and said, "Ma'am, you're being fed lies. This land is mine, legally and fully. I never gave Karen permission, and she knows it. She tried to deceive people into thinking she controlled my property. When I stood my ground, she flipped the story. That's the truth." The reporter pressed, "So you're denying her claims?" I looked straight into the lens, my jaw tight. "I don't just deny them. I call them what they are, lies. And I've got the proof." I held up my folder of documents high in the air. The cameras zoomed in. Karen's smile wavered. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't angry. I was steady. And that steadiness spoke louder than any tantrum she could throw. The crowd of neighbors began to nod, murmuring their support. The cameraman captured every second. Karen's face turned pale again, and before long, she stormed off, muttering to herself. The reporter lowered her mic and said, "Thank you for your time, Mr. McAllister." And just like that, the tide started turning. I knew it wasn't over, but I also knew I had done something important. I had taken back control of the story. And if Karen wanted to keep pushing, she'd have to push against the truth, and against the whole town that was starting to see through her act. As I walked back up the porch steps, I thought about how quickly lies can spread. But also how quickly truth can cut them down when you stand tall enough to face them head-on. Now let me ask you folks something. If someone spread lies about you to the whole community, dragging your name through the mud, would you fight back in public, like I did, or would you stay quiet and let the truth reveal itself over time? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear how you'd defend your name. The cameras were gone, the neighbors had drifted back to their homes, and the dust had finally settled on the road. But inside me, I knew something heavy. Karen wasn't finished. She had lost her grip in front of the sheriff. She had been exposed at the HOA meeting. And now, she had been embarrassed on camera in front of the whole town. Each loss cut her deeper. And I knew, desperate people make desperate moves. For a few days, the ranch was quiet. I worked the cattle, mended fences, checked the horses. The dogs seemed calmer. And for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally run out of steam. But then, Sunday morning came. I was out by the barn, fixing a busted hinge on the door, when I heard the roar of engines. Not one car this time. Not two. A convoy. I walked up toward the house, squinting against the rising sun, and my stomach dropped. 3 black SUVs rolled up side by side, kicking up clouds of dust. Behind them, a van with the HOA logo plastered on the side. And stepping out of the lead vehicle was Karen. Dressed sharper than ever, sunglasses on, flanked by half the HOA board. It wasn't just her anymore. She had backup. They marched right up to my gate like an army. Clipboards, folders, cameras, even a man holding a loudspeaker. It looked less like a neighborly visit, and more like a hostile takeover. I planted my boots firm in the dirt and waited. Karen lowered her sunglasses, smirking. "Tom, you've left us no choice. The HOA board has voted. Your property is being claimed for community use." The man with the loudspeaker stepped forward and started reading something off a sheet, some declaration about eminent rights and shared resources. It was all legal jargon, twisted and hollow. But behind them, I noticed something that made my blood boil even hotter. A bus. An actual charter bus pulling up the road, filled with people. Real estate agents again. Dressed up, smiling, cameras in hand. She was trying it all over again, only bigger. I walked right up to the fence, gripping the wood so tight my knuckles went white. "Not one of you is stepping foot on this land," I said, voice low, steady. Karen laughed, tilting her head back. "Tom, you can't fight progress. This land is wasted on cattle and dust. Imagine the possibilities, events, developments, growth. We're doing you a favor." Her arrogance was like poison in the air. The board members nodded along, mumbling agreement. The realtors on the bus were peering out the windows, confused but eager. I felt the anger boiling in my chest, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because once again, I had the one thing she didn't, the truth. I pulled out my phone, already dialing. The sheriff's office had me on speed dial by now. When the dispatcher answered, I spoke calmly. "Yes ma'am, it's Tom again. I've got the HOA trying to take my land. Whole boards out here, brought a bus full of people. Better send units quick." Karen's smug smile wavered. Her sunglasses didn't hide the twitch in her jaw. She hissed at the board, "Don't worry, he's bluffing. He wouldn't dare call them again." But then, the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Closer. Louder. The realtors on the bus started murmuring. Some even stood up, pressing their faces against the glass to see what was happening. The board members shifted nervously, papers trembling in their hands. Karen tried to hold the line. She barked orders, telling the board to stand firm, shouting that the law would back her. But her voice cracked with each word. When the first sheriff's SUV came rolling down the road, lights flashing, the crowd's energy shifted instantly. The deputies stepped out, scanning the scene. One of them spotted me by the fence and nodded. Then his eyes moved to Karen and the board. "What's this about now?" he asked, his tone sharp. Karen rushed forward, papers in hand, waving them wildly. "Officer, the HOA has voted to reclaim this land for the community. This man is obstructing. He refuses to cooperate." The deputy took the papers, glanced at them for barely a second, then handed them back. "Ma'am, this is nonsense. You can't just vote to take a man's land. That's not how the law works." The silence that followed was thick as tar. The board members looked at each other, their confidence draining like water through a sieve. The realtors on the bus began whispering nervously. One by one, their cameras lowered. Karen's face turned crimson. Her eyes darted around, searching for anyone to back her up. But nobody stepped forward. Not the board. Not the realtors. not even the cameraman she had brought with her. I crossed my arms and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. This is private land. My family's land. No board, no bus, no fake paper is ever going to change that. The deputies nodded in agreement. All right folks, time to pack it up. If you don't clear this road in the next 10 minutes, we'll start writing citations. And just like that, the army crumbled. The board members shuffled back to their cars, avoiding eye contact. The bus doors closed, the engine rumbled, and slowly it turned back toward town. Karen stood frozen at the gate, fists clenched, trembling with rage. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But she had nothing left. No authority. No allies. No ground to stand on. Finally, she spun on her heel, stormed to her SUV, and slammed the door so hard the window rattled. The tires screeched as she sped off, dust rising like smoke behind her. I stood there, watching her disappear into the horizon, my heart pounding but my spirit steady. I knew she might come back again, but each time, she lost more of her power. Each time, more people saw through her lies. And I thought to myself, sometimes the best way to win isn't by shouting or fighting, but by standing tall, staying calm, and letting the truth do the work for you. Now let me ask you folks something. If an entire board showed up at your front gate, trying to bully you with papers and loud voices, would you stand there calmly like I did, or would you lose your patience and shout them off your land? Drop your answer in the comments, I want to hear how you would have handled that standoff. The dust from Karen's tires was still hanging in the air when I leaned on the gate, breathing deep. For a moment, I thought that was it, that maybe she'd finally learned her lesson. But something deep inside me whispered. She had one last move left. And sure enough, it came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, on a hot Thursday afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. Thick envelope. Official stamp. It wasn't junk. It wasn't a flyer. It was a lawsuit. Karen had filed a civil claim against me. She was accusing me of harassment, obstruction, and damages to the HOA. Her demand? That I pay fines, open my land for community events, and publicly apologize. I stood there on the porch, holding the paper, the sweat running down my neck. I'd faced her yelling. I'd faced her lies. I'd even faced her in front of the sheriff and the whole town. But this? This was war on paper. And she thought maybe the law would scare me where her tantrums hadn't. I sat at my kitchen table that night, documents spread out in front of me. The deed. The sheriff's report. Statements from neighbors. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered. And I realized something important. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about setting an example. Showing her, and anyone like her, that homeowners still have rights. That bullies can't just rewrite reality with loud voices and fake authority. So I did what she never expected me to do. I fought back. I hired a lawyer, an old friend from town who knew property law like the back of his hand. We drafted a counterclaim for harassment, defamation, and attempted trespass. We packaged every lie, every stunt, every fake paper sheet thrown at me, into one airtight case. And when the court date arrived, I walked into that courthouse with my head held high. The room was small, packed with locals who'd caught wind of the showdown. Some came out of curiosity. Some came out of support. And a few, I think, just wanted to see Karen finally face the music. She strutted in late, heels clicking, her lawyer by her side. But she didn't look as confident as before. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, a shadow of fear. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Karen's lawyer spoke first, painting me as some kind of hostile, aggressive landowner who refused to cooperate with community development. He waved papers, cited bylaws, tried to twist words into power. But then, it was our turn. My lawyer stood tall, calm, deliberate. He laid out the deed. He presented the sheriff's report. He called in two neighbors who testified about the realtor fiasco and the HOA meeting. And then, he pulled up a video recorded by one of the realtors on the bus the day Karen claimed she had authority over my land. Her voice on camera. Her lies, plain as day. The judge watched every second, face unreadable. When it was done, my lawyer spoke the final words. "Your Honor, this isn't just a case of harassment. This is a case of someone abusing power, lying to her community, and attempting to take land that never belonged to her. We ask not only that this suit be dismissed, but that Karen be held accountable." The silence in that room could have swallowed us whole. Karen sat stiff, eyes darting, hands trembling in her lap. For once, she had no words. No excuses. And then, the gavel came down. The judge dismissed every one of her claims. Every single one. And in a twist Karen never saw coming, he granted our counterclaim. She was ordered to pay damages for harassment, cover my legal fees, and was formally barred from ever stepping foot on my property again. The room erupted, neighbors cheering, some clapping, some shaking my hand as I walked out. Karen stormed past, red-faced, refusing to meet a single eye. Her empire of lies had crumbled right there in front of everyone. When I got back home that night, I walked out to the fence. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. The gate stood strong, locked, shining under the new motion lights. The cattle grazed peacefully, the dogs lounged on the porch. For the first time in weeks, the ranch was truly quiet. And I thought about all of it, her lies, her schemes, her attempts to humiliate me. And I realized something. People like Karen exist everywhere. They wear titles, they hide behind rules, they use fear to control others. But at the end of the day, truth and grit still win. If you stand tall, if you don't break, if you protect what's yours, they can't take it from you. That's what my father taught me on this land. That's what I'll pass down when it's my son's turn to guard this gate. Because this ranch isn't just wood, dirt, and grass. It's family. It's history. It's freedom. And no Karen will ever take that away. Now let me ask you something. If you were in my boots, and the HOA Karen dragged you all the way to court with lies, would you settle quietly just to end the headache, or would you fight back like I did, all the way to the gavel? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how you would handle a battle like this.